Let's now work on the logging functionality. And there I want to log every round that happened in the game, every event that happened in the game. So when we attack the monster, when we launch a strong attack, when we heal ourselves, when the monster hits us, and also when the game is over. And for that we can add a new function, maybe up there, which I'll name write to log, because that's what's going to happen in there. Now in this function, the idea is that we write the different events to a log, and for that we of course also need a variable that holds our log. So here at the beginning of our file maybe, we can add a new variable, battle log, and initially that's an empty array, let's say. Now I want to add entries to that array in the write to log function. For that, it would make sense to expect some kind of event parameter, event identifier, which describes the event that happened, and then have multiple if and else if blocks to check for the different events we want to support. Now, just as in the last lecture with the attack modes, which I set up as global identifiers, I want to do the same for my log events so that we avoid typos. And there I can have my log event player attack, for example, and give this an identifier of player attack, or use a number instead of a string. That's really up to you. Have my log event player strong attack with a text of player strong attack, let's say. Now these texts, as well as the variable or constant names here, are totally up to you. Of course, I just try to describe what we'll use them for. And I use this uppercase only notation here to make it clear that these are static values I, the developer, define here, hard code here at the beginning of my script. Then I also want to have a log event monster attack, of course, because the monster may hit us like this. And also a log event player heal, because we might heal, and also a log event game over, something like this. Now that could be the log events with which we want to deal, and therefore now we can check for them. We can check if event is equal to log event player attack, let's say. And if that is the case, I want to add a new entry, a new object to my battle log, which holds some information about that event. So for that, I'll actually create a new variable inside of the write to log function, so which is only available inside of that function, and that's my log entry. And then here we can set log entry equal to a new object. And in that object, I want to have my event identifier, which is a human readable string. And actually, therefore, here I prefer having a string identifier as we set it up here over a number, because later when we print that log to the console, for us humans, it's easier to see which kind of event that was if we have a string that describes the event than if we have a number which we then have to translate with the help of our code to find out which event that was. So here I store the event. Then I also want to store the value for the event, let's say, so the damage cost. So that's probably also something we should get here as an argument. So I'll expect a value here, a value argument, and store that in my value prop here. And in case it's confusing for you that we have the same names for the keys as for the values here, of course you could get, let's say, EV here and a val, and then use EV here and EV here and val here to make it clearer that the key names are totally detached from the value variable names here. So now I'm storing the event, which is something like player attack, the value for that event, which for the player attack would be the damage dealt. For player heal, it would be the damage for which you healed. For game over, it could be the name of the winner, so player or monster, for example. And I also want to output the final monster health here. And for that, I can access the current monster health. Alternatively, we also expect this as an argument here, which might be cleaner. We could use the global variable, but By using an internal parameter, we make this function a more pure function, which only works with data provided to it, instead of also taking some global value, which is always kind of dirty or harder to follow if you're reading the code. It might be unexpected that a function also pulls in some information from outside, especially if it's a function that also does take parameters. And also the final player health here maybe. And for that, I also expect to get my player health snapshot here and store that. So that could be a log entry we want to create, and then we can reach out to the battle log and push that log entry onto the battle log. This is how we could add a new entry there. Now, of course, we don't just have that case that we have the player attack. We also have many other events that can occur for which we set up identifiers. So we can add another else if statement here, where we check if event is maybe equal to log event player strong attack, let's say. If that is the case, I will basically create my log entry in the same way though. So therefore, actually, we don't really need else if block here, right? Because we only populate the log entry with the data we got here. Well, that's indeed true. You could totally create that function without any if checks if log entry is always created in the same way with dynamic data that changes when you call the function but not inside of the function. To again practice if statements, I will add some extra information here which depends on the event that occurred. I want to say target and here say monster. That's some information we're not getting from outside. Here I'll also add target monster, and then, just as before, push this entry into my log, and then add another else if block where I check if the event is equal to, let's say, log event monster attack, in which case we can also copy that code here, and here the target would be player. That's the difference. Now let's add another case, because we also might have the event that we healed the player. So log event player heal here. And therefore, again, we can copy in that code. The target here is the player, of course. And then we have the last else if block here. The event is that we have the game over case. And there we have no target. So I don't need to set a target here. Instead, I just have my log entry like this. Where I output with the final healths. Value then in this case could be the name of the winner, so player or monster, or draw if we have a draw. And well, then we push this onto our log. Now I push to the log in every case, and therefore we can actually remove that line from the if cases here. So for all the else if blocks and for the main if block, I remove this, and instead I can push log entry onto the battle log after the entire if block, because we know we have a log entry variable. It will hold some value after all these if checks, unless we passed in an EV identifier, which is not covered here. And then we push that entry onto the log. And that uncovered event identifier case shouldn't really happen here, because we will call that function, and we as a developer here will make sure we don't call that function with an invalid value. Alternatively, of course, you could add an extra check, and before you execute any code, check if EV is log event player attack or strong attack or monster attack and so on. And if that is not the case, so actually check if it's not that or not that or not that and so on, then you could return basically such a check, as we also added it earlier in this module in the calculator already. Here I'll not do it, but it is something you could do. Now with that, we create these different log entries here, and you could even refine this code a bit more and actually set log entry to an object here, where you do have all these fields which are always the same. Whoops, didn't want to cut them there. So everything except for target. And then here you would only add log entry dot target and set this equal to monster here, for example. So only add a new property dynamically, which you can do in JavaScript with the dot notation. If you access a property which doesn't exist yet, this will add it dynamically. So you could do that and save even more code. I will leave these other log entries here like this though, just to make it really clear that we do set this information on every if block. We do it with this other approach too, but this might be easier to read and to understand. This approach, however, where you only change the target, of course, is the more dynamic or the shorter approach, and therefore the approach you might want to use in bigger apps. Side note, if you do follow that approach where you set up that object up there and thereafter you only change the target, you can of course omit that last else if block here, because there we don't set a target, so there we already got the readily configured log entry with our default log entry up there. So that's just a side note. Creating all these extra objects is a bit redundant, but I leave it like this for readability here. Then we push that onto our log, and with that we should have a log. Now let's make sure we can also output it. And for that, in the vendor.js file, we have the log button to which we can add an event listener. So I'll do that in app.js at the very bottom here. I add my event listener for a click event, and there I want to have my let's say print log handler function, which doesn't exist yet, which we have to create, maybe right down there, the print log handler function. And in that function, I want to output the log, and for now I'll just console log the battle log variable, which should be that array. Now we just need to make sure that we actually call write to log for every event that we do want to log, because right now that's not something we're doing. So let's do it. And for that, of course, in end round, when the monster hit us, I want to call write to log with my log event monster attack identifier, because the monster attacked us. The value then is player damage, and the monster health at this point then is the current monster health, and the player health is current player health. So this is how we can call this function here. We can also restructure this across multiple lines with the auto formatting shortcut to make that a bit easier to read. So that's write to log after the monster hit us. Now I also want to log when the game is over, and that of course is the case whenever we also call reset. But I need to know whether we won or lost or had a draw, so I will actually write to the log here in these checks where I do know whether we won or the monster won. And then here I will create my log event game over. The value which I now pass in is not the damage, but instead the result of the game. So here that could be player 1, whatever you want to use here. That's any text you want to put into your log message, into your log object. The health snapshots, and then do the same here for the monster if it won, so monster won, and also down there if we have a draw, then maybe output a text of a draw. In the end, you can put any data you want in there. And now we got 2 other events which I want to log, or 3 other events actually. That's when we attack the monster, strong or with a weak attack, and also when we heal ourselves. So let's start with attacking the monster. So here I also want to write to the log after we reduce the monster's health. And which event I write to the log differs based on the mode we have here. So actually we can add a new variable, log event, and then log event is either equal to log event player attack here, or if we selected a strong attack, it's log event strong attack. And now log event is a variable that holds either of the 2 identifiers, so the string values stored in these constants in the end. And therefore now here, when I write to the log, I can use log event, this variable, which is one of my identifiers, or to be precise, the values stored in these identifiers, of course. The value which I want to write to the log is the damage that was actually dealt. And then again, I take my current monster and player health snapshot. And now there's one last thing I want to write to the log, and that is when we healed ourselves. There, after we adjusted the player health, I have my log player heal event. Then I healed by the heal value here, heal value like this, because that's the actual heal value by which we healed. And then again, my health snapshots. So now with that, we should have all that functionality implemented. Back in the app, we can open the developer tools now to see the console. And if we now reload and start a new game and we attack and a strong attack and we heal, and then I show the log, we have 6 events in there, and that makes sense. We have a player attack where we hit the monster. for a value of around 6, and that makes sense because the monster health thereafter is around 94. Then the monster attacks us for around 4 damage points, which again makes sense. Monster health is still what it had after we hit it, but now the player health is reduced by that damage here. And then we launch a strong attack with a value of 10. Monster health thereafter is 83, which makes sense. It was 93 something before, now it's 83 something. After hitting it for 10 something, player health is unchanged. Monster attacks us, so now, well, this is the damage it dealt to us. This is our health thereafter. And so on. We healed ourselves. There you see we healed ourselves for around 6. Fully up to 100 thereafter. But then the monster hits us again. Takes us down to 90. And that's basically what we see there. Now let's continue here and launch a couple of strong attacks until we win. Yep, we did. And now print the log. Lots of messages in there. In the end, you see the game over message. And there you see player 1 and the final monster health below 0, of course. Player health above 0. And therefore, this all works. This is how we can write to the log and how we can output the log like this. Now, later we will learn about loops and therefore how we can output this log in a bit of a nicer way instead of just throwing the entire array in there like this. But for now, this will do. And with that, we also had a lot of if usage. Now I want to dive into some of the neat features which we haven't really talked about yet when it comes to if statements, about conditional code, before we thereafter dive into loops.